Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I want to call the California Board of Accountancy meeting to order. It is July 20th, 2017. Welcome to the new Board of Accountancy offices here in Sacramento. Well done, you. I wish I could take all the credit, but I cannot. But at the same time, I will at least put it on my resume. But we are going to go ahead and get started with a roll call, and we're going to start.
Sunny Youngson Park.
General Ying.
Alicia Burha.
Michael Savoy.
Trina Salazar.
Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines.
Sochi Leon.
George Familat.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here today. So just real quick, I'm going to go ahead and start with our establishment of a quorum, which we have. And in our opening remarks, the CBA's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority for the California Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. So thank you very much for all of you being here today. So we're going to go ahead and start with the first item on the agenda, and we are going to welcome from the Governor's Office, Ms. Ann Halley, the Deputy Appointment Secretary. You come on up, and before you start, I'm going to say nice things about you. So Ms. Halley is the Deputy Appointment Secretary for the Office of the Governor, where she has served as Special Assistant to the Appointment Secretary since 2015. She was the consultant for Debut Communications, Inc. from 2014 to 2015, and President of Crocker Riverside Elementary School Parent-Teacher Association from 2011 to 2014. Ms. Halley is principal at the Ann Halley Design from 2006 to 2009, and a designer and librarian at RMW Architecture and Interiors from 1991 to 2001. She was consultant to the U.S. Department of Transportation and the U.S. Department of Labor from 1997 to 1998, and served as Director of Scheduling at the White House from 1995 to 1997, where she was Deputy Director of Scheduling from 1993 to 1995. You've had quite the career, so... Well, thank you for being here, and we welcome you to the Board of Accountancy today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I won't take too much of your time because I know you have a really busy agenda. First of all, I just want to give you all a big hello from Appointment Secretary Mona Pascal-Rogers. She was really sorry she couldn't be here today, but she just wanted me to extend her personal gratitude for all the amazing work that you're doing on the Accountancy Board. First of all, I want to thank the Board President, Alicia Burha, Vice President Michael Savoy, and Executive Officer Patty Bowers for having me today in your kind invitation. So, as you know, my name's Ann Halley. It's really an honor to be here today. I just want to tell you a little bit about my portfolio and what I do in the Governor's office. I manage all the appointments for the governor for the Department of Consumer Affairs, which is the 40 consumer boards and bureaus, and that also includes the new Bureau of Cannabis Control. I also manage the governor's appointments for the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency, which not only includes Department of Consumer Affairs, but also Department of Housing and Community Development, also Fair Employment Housing Department, Department of Business Oversight, among others. So that's enough about my portfolio, but I just wanted, one of the things that I think binds us all is that we are here for a common purpose, to protect consumers and to serve the state of California. And so on behalf of Governor Brown, I want to extend a wholehearted thank you for all your time that you all devote to the Board of Accountancy to fulfill its mission and purpose. And I know that the time that you spend at board meetings is literally the tip of the iceberg of your commitment. You, in addition to the meetings, you have many hours devoted for your prepping for your meetings, for working on your committee assignments and all the other things that you're doing for the state of California. So again, I just want to say thank you for your service and your commitment to the public, and it is truly greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your service.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much. Do we have public comment or no? On video. All right. Okay. All righty. So thank you very much. We're going to go ahead and move on to, we're going to skip over item B and move on to item C, the presentation of the Department of Consumer Affairs regarding departmental activities. We are thrilled to actually have the DCA Director, Dean Griffillo, if you would like to join us here at the table. And I'm going to say nice things about you too, so you can't escape. So Mr. Griffillo was appointed to the director as director of the California Department of Consumer Affairs on February 22nd, 2017. With the department's executive team, he leads 40 regulatory entities and other divisions within DCA. Prior to his appointment, Mr. Griffillo was Chief of Staff in the Office of California State Assembly Member Rob Bonta since 2012. He is the Associate Director of Government Relations at the California Medical Association from 2009 to 2012, Chief of Staff of the Office of California State Assembly Member Warren Puritani from 2008 to 2009, and the Senior Legislative Assistant in the Office of California State Assembly Member Alberto Tirico from 2004 to 2008. Mr. Griffillo was an organizer representative for the Service Employees Union, International Union, Local 925 from 2003 to 2004, and a political intern for the ML King County Labor Council in 2002 in Seattle. Starting in 1996 through 2001, he was a field representative and organizer at the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Local 142 in Hawaii. We're going to talk about that. And Mr. Griffillo earned a Master of Public Administration degree from the University of Washington. So you've had quite the distinguished career as well. And welcome so much. Welcome to the California Board of Accountancy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, President Berhow. Appreciate the invitation here, Board of Accountancy. Executive Officer Bowers, thank you so much as well for the invitation. Such a pleasure to be here. I'm not going to repeat many of the things that Ms. Hawley said previous to coming here, but I do say that I shared with some of you before as I was riding up to this wonderful location. I've been to a couple other board venues, specifically Contractor State Licensing Board. It's a beautiful location as well, but they have nothing on the Board of Accountancy.
Don't tell anybody.
Personally, as I mentioned to some of you, I live just stone throw away in West Sacramento, and if I have any say in where DCA headquarters may move, you may find a new neighbor sometime soon. In all seriousness, as Ann was mentioning, absolutely appreciate your dedication, your interest in protecting the industry of accountancy, obviously the consumers that are impacted by it. When I was first approached about this opportunity to be the Director of Consumer Affairs, the notion of consumer protections, I think all reasonable minds will in fact support that and want to achieve that. But as you very well know, there's so many vexing, complex issues that you're faced with as a board member. In my past, as the President was mentioning, I've always tried to take a deliberative, robust approach towards creative problem solving. In my time in the legislature, as you could imagine, there's a number of different issues that I'm not familiar with, quite frankly, at all. And so I would try to go about, again, a very deliberative approach, trying to get insight perspectives from as many individuals as possible. That helps give me peace of mind and, peace of mind in knowing that when a decision is made, I'll know because of that robust process, it was well vetted, it was considered thoroughly, and again, gives me confidence in the decisions made. I'm going to share, or pardon me, I'm going to mirror that approach as director at DCA. As you know, 39 boards under DCA. In no way, shape, or form am I going to be an expert in all of those. I'm going to be very, very reliant and deferential to folks like yourselves who do, in fact, have that subject matter expertise on complex issues of the accountancy industry. Coincidentally, I was at the Philippine consulate last week, and they were sharing with me an issue that I hadn't heard about specific to accountancy. You folks may be very well informed about it, and it piqued my interest. Probably shouldn't be too much a surprise personally, a third-generation Filipino-American. The reason why I was there at the accounting board, because as you folks may very well know, there's a large percentage of Filipinos in both nursing and licensed vocational nurses. And here in California, I'd love to explore ways in which we can make the licensing more efficient, specific to nurses who may have studied in the Philippines. Similarly, it sounds like there may be an issue related to accountancy. Granted, again, I know that's going to take longer exploration, longer deliberation, but ultimately my point is if we can do things that are going to improve licensing and enforcement for this industry, for all industries specific to the Department of Consumer Affairs, you will easily find me rolling up my sleeves and endeavoring in such things. So again, thank you so much for having me here today. Unfortunately, I won't be able to take the tour. I assure you I will return for, quote-unquote, the private tour. And, look forward to doing so. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for being here. So I'd like to go ahead and acknowledge that board members Kathleen Wright and Jose Campos have joined us today. So we are going to go ahead and skip on item D, and we're going to move to item E, which is the discussion regarding providing comments to the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy proposed changes to Section 14 of the 7th edition of the Uniform Accountancy Act regarding the use of management accounting titles by non-CPAs. Well, obviously we have Mr. Franzella, but go ahead, Deanne, you'd like to get started?
Thank you. Just to provide some brief background, the Uniform Accountancy Act, which I'll refer to as the UAA, is an evergreen model licensing law developed to provide a uniform approach to the regulation of the accounting profession. The UAA is subject to final approval by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy's Boards of Directors. Although many CBA laws and rules mirror the UAA, the CBA maintains independence in the establishment of its own rules and regulations. Excuse me. In April, AICPA and NASBA approved for comment to state boards, state CPA societies, and others proposed changes to the UAA that would allow qualified non-CPAs to assume or use management accounting designations with certain caveats and restrictions. The proposed changes are identified on the last page of Attachment 1 in Section 14Q. An example of a management accounting designation includes AICPA's Chartered Global Management Accounting Designation, or CGMA, as it's commonly referred to, which was established in 2012. When it was established, an individual seeking this designation was required to be a CPA, pass the CGMA examination, and have 3 years of management accounting experience, and be a member of AICPA. In 2015, the AICPA Council opened up the CGMA designation to certain other qualified non-CPAs. Excuse me. The Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, or CIMA, also has a pathway to obtain the CGMA designation for non-CPAs, which includes completion of specified examinations, obtain a CIMA certificate in business accounting, 3 years of management accounting experience, and be a CIMA member. And I'd like to provide an overview of the proposed changes to the UAA and possible conflicts with the CBA's rules and regulations regarding the use of titles and the impact on consumers. The proposed changes in the UAA would allow the use of accounting designations that include the word management if conferred by an organization such as the AICPA. Individuals with this designation may be authorized to perform audit, attest, and compilation or tax services under the supervision of a licensed CPA. On page 3 of the agenda item and in attachments 2 and 3, we have identified statutes and regulations that prohibit the use of management accounting designations by a non-licensee that is likely to be confused with the certified public accountant or public accountant designations. A caveat to this is the Supreme Court decision in Bonnie Moore versus California Board of Accountancy, which held that the terms could not be prohibited if accompanied by an explanatory disclaimer such as wording that the individual is not licensed by the board or that the services do not require licensure by the board. The proposed changes in the UAA may conflict with the current laws. As mentioned, although individuals with a management accountant designation could perform specified audit, attest, and compilation services under the supervision of a licensed CPA, this could still be confusing to consumers due to the similarities in the designation of CGMA and CPA as to when one would be required to only perform those services under supervision. Further, there may be conflicts with the current practice privilege provisions, which require certain services for entities headquartered in California to only be performed through a firm registered by the CBA. As the CBA deliberates this topic, it may wish to consider that the use of management accounting designations may be confusing to consumers as they try to determine what services an individual can provide and whether the services must be performed under the supervision of a licensed CPA or firm. Additionally, unlike the qualifications for a CPA, the board has no control over the qualifications for the management accounting designation. Should the AICPA and NASBA Board of Directors approve the proposed changes for inclusion in the UAA, the CBA may wish to consider whether it needs to amend its statutes or regulations and also discuss possible outreach to ensure consumers understand the distinctions between a CPA and a non-CPA with a management accounting designation. Staff recommend that the CBA direct staff to prepare a letter regarding its concerns with the UAA proposed changes and reference the potential impact to consumers, possible conflicts with its present practice privilege provisions, and that the CBA doesn't maintain an active role in the requirements to obtain a management accounting designation. As a comment letter isn't due until September 30th, it's requested that the CBA provide specific feedback it wishes to include, and it would be provided for consideration at the CBA's September meeting. I'll turn it back over to President Burhow, and I've asked Enforcement Chief Dominic Franzella to be present should members have any questions regarding the proposed changes to the UAA.
Okay. I'd like to open up to the board members for any comments or questions. So I have one quick question. This came up to me a couple years ago. So with chartered accountants, they're not regulated by us at all. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So,
Correct.
no, go for it.
If they're a non-CPA, they wouldn't be. Some of them do have a CPA license, and
Okay.
there could be those that also have that designation that we would regulate.
So under current law, if they use anything that has the word accountant in it, they have to be a CPA. Otherwise, they're in violation of the Accountancy Act, potentially.
Okay.
So, with respect to enrolled agents, that's the Bonnie Moore case, the dealing with the bookkeeping exemption. So the difference here would be that, like in the Bonnie Moore case, the activity that they were engaging in was not illegal, meaning they could perform those services, tax and bookkeeping services, without a license. Under current law, this proposal would be illegal because the person that would be performing an audit or a compilation. Under your current law, anyone performing an audit or a compilation has to have a CPA license. So even disclaiming that they're not licensed by the board wouldn't help in terms of the misleading aspect, because consumers would think, oh, well, they don't need a license, when in fact they do.
They do.
So the Bonnie Moore case doesn't really help us with respect to the disclaimer issue, I believe,
Okay.
because it doesn't deal with the situation where someone was actually performing work that was illegal for them to do without a license. So this proposal would require fundamental change in what the scope of the CPA license covers. And so you'd have to do substantive amendments to 5051. You'd have to change all the title protection issues in the statute. You'd have to potentially do regulations, like the safe harbor regulation you have in Section 3 of your regulations, to make it really clear to a consumer that they're not a CPA, because it would be very hard to explain that in regulation, but we'd have to take that approach if this was something that the board was interested in pursuing.
Right, and I would be interested in pursuing that, because again, I had a consumer come to me and say, well, this person has telling me that they're a chartered accountant, and I had to call up Mr. Franzella and go, okay, is this person legit? Because they were saying, oh, look how cheap I am in terms of my services. I'm a chartered accountant, and so a friend of mine called me and said, oh, well, hey, is this person legit? And so I would like to see if that's something we can.
Right, well, I mean,
That's a concern I have.
if you're a CPA, you can call yourself that.
Okay.
Because as long as you have the CPA license,
He did not.
well, that's the issue.
That's the issue. Okay. Any other? Mr. Campos?
I think it's a good question on the chartered accountant. I've met many individuals who say they are chartered accountants, not with some disclaimer. I've never looked at any materials or how designations that they use, but that's just a accountant designation in some other country or jurisdiction. Similarly, I listened to the AICPA NASBA discussion on these management designations. They make it clear that there are services they would not be able to do that a CPA would have to do, right? This is just another designation that would be conferred by the bodies that they mentioned. Your point on the disclaimer not helping, I agree that the disclaimer doesn't help if the individual is trying to do services that a CPA needs to do in the state. But if they are not doing those services and they wish to be called a CGMA or whatever they're going to be called, and they use a disclaimer, I do not see how that would be inconsistent with the law or regulations that have just been presented.
Okay. So if you look at the attachment, I don't think it has a page number on it. It's the amendment would be Q1 to the NASBA guidelines, I guess you call them, the rules. The proposed amendment, which would fundamentally change, different, I should say, would be different than what the current Accountancy Act contains, is the language it says that an individual may use an accounting designation that includes the word management conferred by a bona fide nationally recognized accounting organization such as the American Institute of CPAs, provided the designation does not purport to confer the right to perform audit, attest, or compilation services. An individual using an accounting designation who does not also maintain a license or practice privilege shall not offer or render audit, attest, or compilation service for the public, except under the supervision of a licensee operating within a CPA firm that holds a permit issued in this state. So that's different than the current law, which says you can't prepare an audit unless you're a CPA. So you can't prepare an audit if you're not a CPA in California, even under supervision of someone who's licensed CPA. So that's the difference between this proposal and your current law. So what I'm saying is that a disclaimer, if you don't change your statutes, a disclaimer won't help, because it's still misleading for someone to say, oh, I'm not licensed by the California Board of Accountancy. That's true, but it might mislead a consumer into believing they don't need a license when they actually do. So
Let me ask a question about the provisions you just read, and,
Yes.
and I circled that.
right.
You're interpreting that as this individual would sign an attest report after being under the supervision of a qualified CPA. Is that how you're interpreting that provision? Because I'll tell you, the way I interpret it is the supervising individual is taking responsibility for whatever the audit is, and this individual who happens to be a CGMA is working to support that supervising individual in that capacity, much like our staff do in public accounting arenas today, who are not CPAs or working to become CPAs, but a partner would be the one responsible for signing. So it's a good question, because
Yes.
I interpret it as this individual isn't signing a report, the firm responsible is, or the supervising individual is. But if that
Right,
interpretation is incorrect, then that should be clarified.
Right,
Because I agree
exactly.
with you, that would conflict with our laws.
Right. That's exactly my point, and I think it's not clear to me who would be legally responsible for preparing that audit.
Yeah.
And if it's not the licensed CPA, that would be change from your current
So I
statute.
agree. I don't think we need to jump to the conclusion that it's in conflict. I think we need to get clarification as to what does that provision mean and suggest in a comment letter that that be clarified, and maybe make the point that it would not be acceptable for an individual that is supervised in this fashion to be the signing individual on an audit report, review report, whatever the report in question is, right?
Yes.
That would be something to do. But it seems to me that the essential question we need to have, just at the heart of all of this, is we've got a provision in our regs that precludes anybody from calling themselves an accountant of some fashion right now, notwithstanding chartered accountants, which I think is a great point. That's in existence today. I don't know what other type of designations we're aware of already that are probably in the distributed environment.
Well, that's one of the problems I have with this particular proposal as well, is it just says confirmed by a bona fide, nationally recognized accounting organization. So now they can just have presumably a mill of other terms that can be established outside of just the CGMA or chartered accountant. And so I believe it starts to maybe dilute the term somewhat and is very conflicting with our statute and regulations as they are now. But chartered accountants, when we see the word accountant all the time, but we work with them to get the proper disclaimer. Same with the word auditor is more freely used than probably historically done. I mean, state auditor, internal auditor, things of that within a company who aren't CPAs, so that the terms are starting to get more widely used. And this just seems to open up that box larger.
So I'll make one last, so I think the heart of the question is, does this board have any reason to believe that our existing regs that talk about accountant, auditor, whatever, need to be changed at all, right? And that disclaimer is appropriate or not appropriate, or that we need to be more accommodating to the fact that stuff has changed. Regardless of this, stuff has changed already beyond that.
Okay.
Katrina?
Ms. Salazar.
So I would add maybe a counterpoint to Mr. Campos's suggestion. I do think that is key to look at, what do our regs say and when they need to be reevaluated. However, my understanding of this from going to NASPA events and unfortunately out-of-state travel, which is really important when determining international licensing, say from the Philippines, CAs and issues like this going to NASPA is very helpful. So we did not get an update from the regional meeting, but from the prior meetings, the issue is this a conflict for our mission of consumers? I mean, that was really the concept from NASPA. This, as I understand it, the board members that have reached out to me from NASPA, it has been, is this something that each individual state board wants? Not, this is being put forward for approval, and how do you adjust your regulations? The question really is this consistent with our mandate to protect consumers? And what I will share is that I have learned that, as Mr. Franzella mentioned, there have been a history of other organizations trying to create certifications, and this language in the UAA and our own regulations has kept out those confusing monikers and designations to try to keep the definition of a CPA clear to consumers. And so, although this is coming from the AICPA, which is closely aligned with us, to me, my concern is it harder for consumers to understand the product they're getting? And we do need to be aware that this will not be the first designation, because I would expect, based upon the conversations I've heard, that there will be other challenges from other organizations that probably don't even exist yet, because there are dues dollars associated with these designations, and there will be other ones. So this opens the ability for organizations to begin to challenge and create multiple designations, which in my opinion would be detrimental to consumers, because it's hard enough today for consumers to figure out how what the qualifications are and how do they evaluate their needs for accounting.
Thank you for that. Do you have another opinion?
No,
Good.
I
I'm
agree
always
with what's
waiting
been
for it.
said, but I think that takes us back to, we then need to conclude or decide, I mean, are regs the appropriate regs? And if so, then our response to those putting this forward is, this would be a conflict, and you would have to advise individuals that your designations are gonna need to vary depending on the state you're in.
Do we need anything else for a comment letter? Or do we have all the information we need?
I think so. I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to need to be a policy call by the board, whether they want to move forward with that. I think that any title restrictions, further restriction, probably you'd want it to be in statute as opposed to regulation, because of the North Carolina case. Title protection cases can get difficult to defend from a First Amendment perspective. So I think that, it would have to, just like I said, have to be a policy call. We'd have to figure out which vehicle, whether it would be regulatory or statutory change, that would be best to address the issue.
Okay. So do we need to take a motion on any of this, or just, this is just strictly comment?
So, yes, but did you want, Patty, a motion to direct the staff to prepare a letter to include these comments?
We don't need a motion. This item will come back before the board in the form of a letter in September.
Oh,
and
for
that
approval.
would then be the
Okay.
appropriate
You want
time to approve
Ms.
that
Salazar?
letter.
Well, I'm wondering if there is a benefit to determining if there is a consensus of the board. Does the board want
Yeah.
to
Right.
support? Because clearly, support for this proposed revision to UAA would then mean we would be, it's just a different position. I think that's probably would be more helpful in a comment letter to say, we are opposed for it for X reasons, or we support it for these reasons. And regardless, we will have to evaluate our documents and ensure that, we are, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. But I think the question is, what does this board as a whole think? And I will throw out there, I am not in support of the proposed changes to the rules because of my concern for consumer protection within our state.
Thanks for that. Ms. Wright?
Thank you. Forgive my ignorance before I ask this question, but what was puzzling me a little bit about this issue, because this is in a field of accounting where I don't really practice, was do these folks, and I've seen this designation many times, CGMA, meet the same requirements for licensing as CPAs do? My sense was, no, they don't, because there is a category here that talks about non-CPAs if you do certain things. Therefore, expanding the scope of use of the term accounting would then, and then I think, Katrina, I'm following your point more closely, would confuse the public in light of the fact that they would be under the impression that the requirements for the CPA designation would likewise be applied to the CGMA designation, which in fact is not the case. Is that true?
The only comment I want to make is, since I am a CGMA in addition to being a CPA, I wanted to listen first before I said anything, but you bring it right to the point. Having been a CPA and been a managing partner for 10 years at a firm, I just filled out an application. There was no exam. There was nothing further than exactly what I explained. So being a CPA first, it's nice to have some more initials, but I'm not sure about the inverse of that. So
Interesting.
that's,
So what was your view then on this, on Katrina's question?
Yeah.
well, I think we need more clarity because of the word being used, accountant, in the definition. So I think clarity is what's needed.
Plot thickens. Ms. Salazar?
For disclosure, I also have a dual.
Whoa.
Wow.
And I joined
It comes out
as
now.
well also to see. But like I said, I'm concerned about the inverse of people using the designation without the license CPA.
Yeah.
And that's
the
my-
confusion
right.
that will ensue with consumers.
Right, and that's my concern as well.
I think I keep going back to what I think the essential question is, right? This is in conflict with our regs because of the use of the word accountant in it. And if I'm not hearing any proposals here that indicate we should change our regs, hence our comment letter would have to be, our regs would conflict with this, we as a board don't see a reason to change our regs, and hence other workable solutions need to be made, i.e. did you consider using the word professional instead of accountant in there, or some other terminology? I'm sure they did, because this has been a fervent issue for some time, but they decided to go down this path, and I agree that there is I personally don't have a view of changing our regs, and despite the fact that I think we already have the use of the word accountant and auditor out there in ways that are for folks that are not CPAs, and in cases where there is no disclaimer that you readily see on these individuals' CVs or what have you.
Ms. Wright?
My second question related to the discussion that ensued at the outset with Jose, which was, I think, related to responsibility for whatever report is being prepared and signed, and Jose's interpretation of that being that it's the firm that is assuming the responsibility if this management account is working under the scope of a CPA partner, so to speak. Who gets penalized? In the tax area, it's pretty clear. I mean, if you're a tax return preparer and you, forgive the expression, mess up, the penalty on the tax return preparer is shared. It's only one penalty, but it's shared between the individual who signed the return and the firm. What are the penalties if somebody, excuse the expression, messes up on one of these test engagements and does the work and it's a CGMA, but what, is the report signed by the firm partner? Is that how this would go forward?
I am not no CGMA,
Oh.
and see, you said a test, and presumably a CGMA only, so no CPA, cannot do a test work,
Okay,
right? Cannot sign a test work,
okay. Fair enough.
subject to clarification of that
Yes,
one
yeah.
Q2 point that's
Yeah.
in here.
But a CGMA could do accounting work and get signed off by an accounting firm? That's
That's what
a CPA.
happens today.
Okay.
Non-CPAs work in firms and do a bulk of the audit work, but it is under the oversight of CPAs.
Okay.
So that was the reason for your comment, that it would be just like hiring a junior person, whether they're CGMA or not, but they're not CPA. That they would work for you, you'd be responsible, but they do the work. So the CGMA fits in that way? Is that how this?
It's just another designation, but that person can't assume, under California law, that person can't, assume responsibility for, as a CPA, responsibilities that a CPA has.
So then I come to the conclusion, there are several distinctions between what this person is allowed to do under California law and what they are not allowed to do.
Right.
That being the case, we should try to preserve that distinction to the extent possible, and that in adopting terminology that might go forward in a more bringing the two professions together as opposed to keeping the two professions separate in designations would seem to be contrary to our purpose.
Okay. And then just real quick, are there any other states that are dealing with this issue, or has any other states made any changes to distinguish the two? I don't know if you have a question, that answer.
I know it's a national topic that's brought up at, I think, every NASBA meeting, but I'm not aware. This is the first kind of step in bringing this to the forefront, giving language to the states to evaluate, but I'm not aware of any states at this point who have adopted or made changes as a result of the CGMA. But I do believe they share very similar concerns that this board does.
So do we send a letter out, or do we just keep it,
Okay,
you
letter
have the
comes out.
comments in?
Yes, we'll take the comments provided today and craft a draft letter and then bring that back before the board in September for its consideration.
And just to make Ms. Shields happy, is there any public comments for this? Are you happy? Okay.
Yes.
All right, I knew you were waiting for that. Okay, thank you, Mr. Franzella, thank you, Ms. Pierce. All right, and thank you to the board members. Okay, moving on to item F, we're going to have the discussion of regarding a possible change to the California Board of Accountancy January 2018 meeting dates. So, Ms. Reed.
All right. Agenda item 1F provides members with a proposed change to the January 2018 CBA meeting calendar, changing the date of the January 25th through 26th, 2018 CBA meeting to January 18th through 19th, 2018. Due to the fact that the January 25th through 26th, 2018 CBA meeting date coincides with a major event in Sacramento, staff is unable to secure a lodging room block within the state rate of $95 per night. To retain the CBA meeting in Sacramento and secure lodging rooms at the state rate, the CBA may wish to move the meeting date to January 18th through 19th, 2018. The Martin Luther King Jr. holiday will be observed on Monday, January 15th, 2018. The CBA may wish to make a motion to change the January CBA meeting date to January 18th through 19th, 2018. And at this time, I would like to turn it back over to President Burhout and would be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any comments or questions from the board?
I move to change the meeting date for January to January 18th, 19th of 2018.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any other comments? Any comments from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
Alicia Burhout,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell-Hines,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Jen Oyang,
Yes.
Sunny Young-Sun Park,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
and Kathleen Wright.
Yes.
Okay, passes unanimously. What's the big event? Are we not supposed to know?
A wine symposium.
Yes. We'll talk about that one later, so.
You'll be here.
I will be here the week after for that, so, all right, well, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go on to item G, developments since the February 2015 United States Supreme Court decision, North Carolina State Board of Dental Examiners versus Federal Trade Commission. Ms. Shields.
Okay, a very brief update. The Federal Trade Commission, the acting commissioner has announced that they will be impaneling and have created an economic liberty task force to investigate, among other things, whether states are actively supervising board actions that displace competition. The first topic that they're going to address is what the approaches are across states for making it easier for workers in state licensed occupations to offer their services across state lines or move between states. So the board's a little bit ahead of the curve on that one. The meeting will happen July 27th, but we'll be tracking that committee to see if any other recommendations and topics of interest come out of that committee, because it could result in either enforcement actions or possible legislation at the federal level.
Okay. Is there any comments or questions to the board? Ms. Hines?
Are they going to do hearings around the country, or are they only going to do hearings in Washington, D.C.?
It looks like it's in Washington right now. I mean, I could see the possibility of that happening across, but they do take public comment, and there's a list of questions online that you can go on and log on and submit comments on, and this particular topic, I think there's 10 to 15 questions about portability and mobility that they're asking for a public comment on. So even if you're not able to attend the roundtables, you could submit public comments to this working group. So
I wonder if this is something which we should keep in mind, attempting to make comments about the goal of consumer protection as the FTC is considering the antitrust aspects of this, keeping in mind, states, especially, large ones like ours, where we have such a robust commitment to protecting the public as our mission,
we're regulating accountants, there might be a reason for us to make sure that we submit some public comment along the way, like that we monitor it to make sure that there is an opportunity for us to submit public comment on that aspect of, and make sure that that's part of their deliberations as they're considering these issues.
Well, that would be up to the board if they would like the staff to look into that or not.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the board? I'd like to see if staff could go ahead and monitor that situation. Thank you, Ms. Hines, for that.
What was the timing of these meetings again?
Well, the first one is scheduled for July 27th. I don't have any other dates so far, but it's available on the ftc.gov website in the news events calendar link. But you could just type in Economic Liberty Public Roundtable, and it brings up all the agendas and comment links and things like that.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments, questions? And I'm just going to throw it out there. Any comments or questions from the public? Just to make you happy.
Thank you.
Because that's what it's all about.
Okay, good.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. Okay, moving on to Section 2, Report of the Vice President, Mr. Savoy.
Thank you. This item is to recommend the reappointment of Jeffrey DeLizer, CPA, to the Enforcement Advisory Committee. The Enforcement Advisory Committee assists the CBA in an advisory capacity with enforcement activities. This includes reviewing closed investigation files, providing technical guidance on open investigations, and participating in investigative hearings. I have conferred with the CBA Executive Officer to verify that Mr. DeLizer has met the appropriate requirements for license renewal and has demonstrated the skills and knowledge to serve as a member of the Enforcement Advisory Committee. Mr. DeLizer has made significant contributions that have assisted the Enforcement Advisory Committee in accomplishing its role, and I recommend that Jeffrey DeLizer be reappointed as a member of the Enforcement Advisory Committee effective August 1st, 2017 through July 31st, 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Savoy. Is there a motion?
I move to reappoint Jeff DeLizer.
Thank you, Mr. Campos. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Hines. Is there any comments or questions? Any comments or questions from the public? Okay, we'll call for the vote.
Okay, Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Jin O-Yang,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Alicia Burhell,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
and Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Okay, with that, it passes unanimously, and congratulations, Mr. DeLizer, you're stuck with us. Fantastic. Okay, moving on to item 3, double duty for you, Mr. Savoy.
My pleasure. The State of California's fiscal 2017-18 budget was signed on June 27th. The total budget for the California Board of Accountancy is set at $13,463,000. The repayment of $21 million of loans plus interest of approximately $2.6 million was posted to the Accountancy Fund in June 2017. This repayment brings the general fund loan balance to zero. When I became a board member almost 7 years ago, there was $31,270,000 owed. I thought this day would not come. So I'm extremely pleased that we've gotten our money back.
Can somebody send a note to Sally Anderson, please?
We will do that.
Yeah, this was a hot topic for many meetings.
Yeah.
The CBA's fund condition statement to be presented at the September CBA board meeting will reflect how many months we now have in reserve, and a reevaluation of the fund condition will be conducted during this fiscal year to determine what, if any, changes are needed to the existing fee structure. The fiscal 16-17 year-end financials will also be presented at the September meeting. That concludes my other report.
Okay, thank you for that. Any comments or questions from the board? Any comments from the public? All right, thank you very much. Well done, and yes, very happy to have all of our cats back. All right, moving on to item 4, we're going to have the report from Ms. Bowers.
Thank you very much. I don't actually have any updates on staffing today, and so I would like to invite Mr. Bone, our Information and Planning Officer, to address item 4B.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Good morning, Madam President and board members. I'm pleased to provide some brief comments about our recent outreach efforts. Last month, CBA member Katrina Salazar joined the staff of the CBA to attend the California Financial Literacy Fair, which was held on June 16th at the State Capitol Park. That event is intended to help Californians gain access to free information about saving, investing, and credit options. Visitors to our table were able to get access to our consumer assistance booklet and verify the license status of the CPA. In addition, a number of attendees were actually interested in becoming a CPA themselves. So Ms. Salazar and staff provided them the educational experience and other requirements for licensure. Finally, Madam President, preparations are underway for our outreach activities to be held at the campus of CSU Fullerton. Thank you again for your assistance in securing that. That'll be held in conjunction with our September board meeting. We plan to invite students to attend the CBA meeting on Thursday, September 14th, where we will discuss the requirements for licensure and provide an opportunity for students to learn from the board and network with the board members. And we look forward to partnering with Cal CPA and continue to partner with the university on that effort. And that concludes my remarks, and I'll turn it back to you.
All right, well, thank you very much. I have to give a shout out to Greg Sachs from Cal State Fullerton, Chris Reese, and Jeannie Tran for making that happen. So they're very, very excited about hosting us in September. And thank you for your hard work on that. Nice picture, Ms. Salazar, in the outreach report. And I'm not going to let Ms. Bowers get away without congratulating her on her newest addition to the family.
Oh, thank you.
You can't miss it. She's got a big old cup with it says Grandma on there. So congratulations. Thank you. So, is there anything else from you?
No.
Well done. Thank you. Congratulations. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to item 5, report of the Enforcement Advisory Committee and Qualifications Committee, peer oversight, but I think it's just going to be enforcement, and that's going to be Mr. Rosenbaum. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. I'll report on the Enforcement Advisory Committee for the meeting held on July 6th in Sacramento. I'd like to also first thank Mr. George Familet for as our liaison for attending the meeting, as well as Mr. Jose Campos. So we have both of our northern and southern liaisons attending the meeting, and I will say that we also had a preview tour of the offices, so you're in for something special. At our meeting, we reviewed, as per usual, some of the closed cases. We reviewed 14 closed cases, but something a little bit different this time around. We also had some of our members review open cases as well as probationer work product. So we looked at 15 open cases. So that was in an effort to help the staff guide them in some of the efforts before they came all the way to an investigative hearing. We also had scheduled 2 investigative hearings. However, one of the licensees declined to attend at the last minute, so we only concluded a single one. Our next meeting will be held October 19th in Burbank.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions from the board?
Yeah, I have a question. So I was at the front end of the meeting, and the open case review was a bit of a newer concept. Is that a go-forward strategy that collectively both sides thought would be an efficient use of time?
Absolutely. We were looking for a way for our members to get a little bit more involved. Since we are there gathered to do the investigative hearings, it made sense to also comment on some of the open cases. So this was done in conjunction with staff.
Good.
Any other comments? Any comments or questions from the public? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to item 6, and that is the report of the Enforcement Chief, Mr. Dominic Franzella. Thank you, and welcome back.
Thank you. Good morning. So this is agenda item 6A. It's the enforcement activity report. It's a report as of May 31st, so it's 11 months worth of data. At the September meeting will be the full fiscal year of data at that time. So looking at page 1 of the report with complaints, I'll just go through it incrementally page by page. If members have any questions, please feel free to ask along the way. For the first 11 months, we received just over 2,300 complaints. So we're on pace, pretty close pace for the prior 2 fiscal years. I will note that the closed no action is a significantly lower volume than prior years. This year is 352, and the prior years it was at or close to 700. That was due to fingerprints and that Corey period where we had a large influx of cases come through there that we opened, but were able to close pretty quickly without any real investigation taking place. So that number is down compared to prior years. Moving on to investigations, we've assigned just over 2,000 cases so far this year, and we have closed slightly more cases than we've assigned, so that's generally a good thing right now. We did have an increase in the average day to close from 154 to 165, but that was due to us closing 10 cases that were over 24 months, so it raised that average out. We do still have a high volume of cases over 24 months. It's slightly down from the prior report, but still 133. We looked at the statistics again just before this meeting, and it's actually down to 113, so we're still making some headway on working this particular backlog. But year to date, we have successfully closed 85 cases over 24 months, so we have at least 113 more to go, so we're still working to get that number driven down. Moving on to page 3 in discipline. Oh yeah, please.
I'm sorry, you said as we go along, so I'm taking you at your word. Back to page 1 for just a moment. I've asked this before, and because it appears again, I'll ask again. Over the past 2 months, CBA has received X number of complaints, with the top external complaint being tax-related matters. That still holds true, right?
Yes. Yeah, and these could be from anything of I just didn't like how much I paid my CPA for the tax work to I didn't get a big enough refund. So there's a whole host of reasons for the tax-related ones.
And does the, well, actually, I don't recall your answer from last time. The disposition of these cases is typically what?
If something like that is non-jurisdictional and we really don't do anything with, if they're dissatisfied with the amount of the return or they had to pay too much, those are things that we're going to investigate, or that a fee dispute are non-jurisdictional for us. So we do reach out to them and clarify what the board's abilities are and what our jurisdiction is, and give them an expectation of what we do, and that usually solves many of the problems, and we direct them to other avenues such as maybe small claims court or some other venue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So back on page 3, the discipline. I'll highlight the closed, which are the disciplinary activities the board takes. It's at 75. That I believe another 19 were taken in last meeting, so the number will probably end up at 94 for the year. So that will be the most the board has taken at any point, and it's over the prior year as well. We continue to keep the AG desk below 100 outstanding cases, which is good. However, we do have 8 cases over 24 months. Again, we say it every time. The first one has been on there since 2012, so we continue to monitor that with the AG's office. It's in the Court of Appeals, and we're just waiting that out. The remaining cases all have either a hearing set, or a hearing has occurred, or the board actually took action at the last meeting and it hadn't taken effect by the time this report was run, and only one case has an accusation that's just in the process of being drafted. So
those 24 months, so all of them are so the one case that's in the Court of Appeals, and then the other 7, they're all just waiting for an outcome.
Yeah, some actually have. One has an outcome. The board took action last meeting. It just didn't take effect till June, so It still shows up there. The other one has a proposed decision we're waiting on. Another has a hearing set, or we're working to go or settlement on. So they're all actively being worked. Moving on to citations, again, our citation number is down and it's going to continue to be down, I presume, going forward because we're working diligently to obtain compliance at an early stage with increased communication and increased outreach, especially over the phone and via email. We did decrease the number of days from receipt of complaint to issuance of citation by 14 from 182 to 168. And the most common citation is CE related and primarily yearly CE 20 and 12 requirement.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Ms. Hines.
I just wanted to make a comment that will become relevant later in our meetings. I'd like to have this enforcement activity report referenced when we talk about several of the bills that have come up, legislative bills that have come up about reducing fines or easing the burdens upon small business owners as related to fines. There's this concern that California is not as friendly to small businesses, and there are several pieces of legislation that have been introduced with the idea of reducing or minimizing the fines and citations that small business owners, licensed small business owners may encounter. And I think it's important that we have this kind of information available when we're making comment about those pieces of legislation and our concerns about efforts to eliminate or reduce citations and fines against small business owners, because I think that this information really goes to support the idea that our board is very, we are very collaborative with our licensees in making sure that these are not punitive actions, but they're really going to the heart of some, substantive concerns that we may have about licensees, and that we try to work very diligently with them as small business owners to not be burdensome, but to really address what the mission of our agency is, which is to protect the public. So I think this is important information for us to, when we provided, I think, 2 letters of comment that, about pieces of legislation, and about concerns about reducing or eliminating fines and citations on small business owners. I think it would be helpful to include this information with those comment letters just as additional evidence to support our position to the legislators when they're introducing this kind of legislation.
Ms. Wright?
Thank you for that comment, because that is on the same issue where I also had a comment related to enforcement activity. And if my comment should come later at some other point in the agenda, just please tell me and I'd be glad to bring it up at some future point. But you opened the door, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it up here. My concern is on that same issue, but is a little bit different. And I'm not sure I know what is feasible with the way of, in the context of information that you might provide to us, but it relates to all of these situations where we address costs and reimbursement of costs. And it's my perception, which may not be correct, but it's my general perception that we frequently do not recover all of the costs of the investigation. And that parallels your comment, working with whoever it might be, to come up with something which is manageable for the individual or the firm. My comment on that, and the point which has been disturbing to me ever since I've started looking at these pink sheets, is the following. This is not our money. This is the taxpayers' money. When we reduce costs, we are using every dollar of state funding, with the exception perhaps of the fees that we collect for licensing, is taxpayer money. I mean, that's how we fund the government. When the FTB forgives anything, interest, penalties, or tax, they are required to post that on their website so that the taxpayers of the state of California know what they are doing with debt forgiveness.
Can I get some clarification as
Yeah.
how it's related to this activity report? Because it sounds like a different topic.
Yeah, because I'm
Well,
confused
it's
as well.
licensing costs, and I don't know, that's why I preceded my comment by saying I don't know where it would be appropriate for me to.
Yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
like a different
Yeah, I mean,
agenda
talking about
item.
fines and penalties versus cost recovery, I
Correct.
think it's totally
two different things.
Yeah, I mean, totally, and you can see we have reduced fines by almost half in the 11-month period.
Well,
So, I mean, we're aware of that and working
Yeah.
with the CPAs out there that have been admonished. What you're talking about is a whole different story.
but in that section on licensing costs that we see in the pink sheets,
That's a completely different
Completely
topic.
different,
definitely.
different.
completely different.
Yeah, it's not
all right, fair
appropriate here.
enough.
Recovery of costs are not penalties. It's recovery of costs.
Ms. Hines?
I think what you might be getting at for us to have a conversation about later is actually a budgetary issue. And when we're looking at our budget and how we're drafting our budget, taking into consideration whether we're being efficacious with the funds that the CBA uses, and whether it's in our best interest to forgive a lot of those costs, whether it's that's a proper use of the funds in our budget. So it's not a conversation related to this, but it is not. I think it is a relevant question to raise at some point for the board to occasionally look at how much it costs to enforce disciplinary actions, and whether or not our board is being is being judicious and is fulfilling our fiduciary roles in the ways in which we forgive those costs. I mean, I'm not saying that we aren't, but it's something to be considered,
Right, and maybe
but it's
that's,
off topic.
something we can discuss at the end when we do future agenda items. We can
Yeah.
add that to it. So if you want to bring that up toward the end, that would be good.
Okay.
Okay. And then just real quick, Ms. Hines, on your idea, because I really like that idea. So when we, I don't, where's Nushin? I know she's here.
Nushin,
sorry.
yes.
Yeah, so we're,
I can.
so, no, just a quick question in that is, when we send out comment letters now, do we have any enforcement information in there when it comes to legislation? By all means.
So this is relative to a topic
Oh,
that is a
shit.
bill that's on the agenda at a later point in time, perhaps tomorrow's agenda, I believe.
This
But
afternoon.
oh, is it this
Yeah.
afternoon? But that's for the committee discussion. So
I brought this up because I would like to, I don't think we can raise it today because it's not, it hasn't been agendized, but I would like to present it to the staff so that as the legislative committee is thinking about, about these issues, I think this is a relevant piece of information.
Should I
So
wait to have her
I
say something?
think that would be more appropriately discussed at the Ledge Committee or at I think the full board
Okay.
meeting is going to be talking about all the legislation that was discussed. And the legislation that you mentioned is in that list
Yes.
of bills that we're going to be talking about. So I would recommend that you hold off on
All
that.
right, we're going to hold off on that. So stay tuned for the Ledge Committee later on. Thank you, Doug, for that.
But thank you, Dominic, for the information. I think it's very helpful and it is very clarifying, for us.
Okay. Continue on.
So, page 5,
All right.
probation monitoring. The number of probationers is up, was only up 4 this last time. I really think we'll be at about 150 pretty soon, based on last meeting and this meeting's work that the board has in front of it. So we're getting more and more probationers, but we're trying to stay on top of it as best we can. We held 9 probation orientation meetings between the last report, but we had 31 scheduled between June and July, and we've handled, I'm not sure if it's all yet, but close to all 31. Either we went to Oakland and met with them in the Bay Area, we did telephonic phone calls, and I think we've almost all 31 taken care of. So we're trying to keep on top of the orientation to make it as successful as possible for the licensee.
Question. I think, so you're saying we're up by 4. Okay, so the line item you're not showing here is probationers that came off of probation.
Correct.
So that completed their period, okay.
Yeah, we can add that to show what comes on, what comes off, and it can balance itself out better. As it
I
goes.
originally thought it could have, and so I was going to ask if that was a net number or what have you, but now I get that you're just trying to confuse me, so good.
That's a good question from an accountant, so I'm impressed.
Yes, let's add the line item.
I'll add mine, yes, absolutely. The last item, statistical item, is mobility. Again, the numbers are higher for the SEC and PCOB received. That's just because we're doing it on a monthly basis instead of every 6 months, so we're getting to those a lot sooner. Finally, on division highlights and recruitment efforts, we've identified our various vacancies. We actually have interviews scheduled for next week for the Associate Governmental Program Analyst for the AG unit, so hopefully we'll be filling that soon. But we did receive word week before last that one of our more tenured ICPAs is retiring, Marla Wiseman. I think either at the end of this week or the beginning of next week, so we're going to actually be down one of the ICPAs, and we'll start evaluating that position and considering recruitment as soon as possible. Finally, to Mr. Campos's question earlier about the EAC, yes, I've been working with the chair and the leadership related to improvements on, or what else we can do to get the EAC involved. We took an agenda item on improving the IH process that we got feedback and input from members on, so we'll be adjusting that. But part of the upfront intake items that we're having them look at is to get earlier set of technical eyes on them at the onset to see if there's certain things that we can ask the licensee before it gets into the queue for the ICPAs. If there's certain documents we can request, if there's something that we aren't seeing right off the bat that may be allowed for closure, or also just if there's an opportunity to have an IH earlier, an investigative hearing earlier, instead of waiting towards the end of the process to ask our questions or the things we want to bring them in earlier for. So we're trying to ramp up activities with that group as well. So hopefully, cumulatively, all of these things will start to drive down some of the inventory. But I'm happy to turn it back over, and I'll answer any additional questions members may have.
Okay. Mr. Campos?
Yeah, on pages 2 and 3, so we've got the investigations and the discipline agings. Remind me on how the agings work. So for investigations, is that from the date you open the investigation file?
Yes.
And then once something if something refers to the AG's office, does it come off the investigations list and then go on to the discipline list?
It does.
So you treat it as closed or what have you on investigations?
Correct.
And then the aging on the discipline side, is that from the date of referral?
Correct.
And so there's an inherent, then when you compute the final days to close something, it is from the date you opened the investigation?
Correct.
Even if it went through the AG's process?
Correct. Any performance measure that we would do, while we distinguish them on the report where we intake to our closure and then picking it up in referral to the AG to its closure, any final disposition of a case would encompass all of that period. So like this one that's been on the report since 2012, that'll eventually hit a performance measure, but Ms. Bowers and I have already talked about maybe footnoting that or providing different 2 tiers of numbers, because I think there's some aberrations with things like that that really throw off any of the actual efforts of the board's enforcement process.
Understood. Okay.
Ms. Bowers?
And it might be helpful for members to know that this type of enforcement reporting and how we track and report out our numbers, our statistics, is consistent throughout the Department of Consumer Affairs boards.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board members? Any comments or questions from the public? With that, thank you very much. We're going to go on to item 7, report of the licensing chief, Ms. Sanchez.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Put my little name tag just in case.
Yeah, I need to see.
I have 2 today. Okay, well, good morning. Today's licensing activity report reflects statistics through May 31st, 2017. As usual, our September board meeting will have the complete fiscal year. So I'd like to begin by mentioning that this report has a few formatting changes from my previous division reports. We continually strive for accuracy, transparency, and ease of use when you're looking through licensing division statistics. So we'll start on page 1 is our CBA's total population. In addition to licenses issued, this report now includes out-of-state firm registrations. that we also issue. So this brings our total population to 103,239. The second page reflects our contact with stakeholders. In addition to telephone calls and emails that we typically report, I've now included our certification requests in this section. These requests are from stakeholders such as licensees or other state boards for a document that certifies an applicant's CPA exam score or exam passage. All right. Moving on to pages 3 and 4, they reflect statistics for the uniform CPA exam. Specifically, page 3 provides the total number of applications received and approved in the unit. Page 4 details the number of special requests that we receive from applicants. Conditional credit and notice to schedule extensions are requests from candidates to extend their score past the 18 months or their NTS as they were prevented from sitting for the exam due to an extenuating circumstance. So there's a whole application process that goes through that we review and approve. In addition, we offer special accommodation requests. These requests are granted to those needing an accommodation, such as extra time, maybe a separate room, additional breaks, and this is all per the American Disabilities Act. Okay. Statistics for the CPA initial licensure are on pages 5 and 6. Page 5 identifies that we have issued 2,965 CPA licenses, with 2,117 with general authority and 848 with the authority to sign attest engagements. Page 6 shows the total firm licenses issued is 245 and 70 out-of-state firm registrations have been issued. Moving on to page 7, CPA renewal and renewal-related statistics are on pages 7 and 8. 41,380 licenses have been renewed so far this year, which includes active and inactive statuses. Renewal staff have reviewed over 38,000 renewal applications so far and have processed 825 CE audits. So when deficiencies are identified, staff work diligently with the licensee to get them into compliance. There are times when we have to refer them to enforcement, and as of May 31st, 1,048 have been referred to enforcement for further review or investigation due to deficiencies in subject areas as peer review, CE violations, or convictions. Moving on to page 8 in our division highlights, CBA's annual oversight of the administration of the CPA exam at Prometric testing centers is underway. I'd like to thank those that volunteered this year. They should be receiving their volunteer packets by the end of next week. And it is expected, again, that all sites will be visited this year. That concludes my report for the licensing division. I'd like to turn it back over and be happy to answer any questions.
Ms. Wright?
Thank you, and thank you for your report.
Thank you.
Is there a way for us to determine from the statistics that you've provided what the pass rate is on the exam?
The pass rates are given to us by NASBA, which we can provide in the September report as an attachment if you'd like. I'm sure we can get those from NASBA.
Do you receive, well, the pass rate that you receive would obviously be California. Do you get the pass rate for other states?
Yes, we get a report from NASBA annually, actually, that identifies pass rates for all states and in general. They separate it out quite nicely. It's a detailed, thick book, actually.
Either, and I don't know if the other members of the board are interested in that. I know that we get some information by university, actually, within California, but I'm very interested, I mean, I teach, so I'm very interested in the pass rate for our state compared to other states, not only in the context of what I do for a living, but also in the context of the recent experience on the bar exam. The California bar exam had a phenomenally low pass rate, and particularly when compared to other states. And that has triggered then a whole discussion regarding whether or not the Bar Association or the California Supreme Court should be the one that administers the bar. And the California Supreme Court just about 10 days ago stepped in and said, we're doing it going forward. The Bar Association is no longer going to be responsible for this, which leads to the question for you.
Well, Ms. I don't think is this also off topic?
It appears to be off.
Okay. Well, but the question is, when you get these pass scores, there's no such concept as a cut score for the CPA exam, meaning a pass rate score that would be distinguished by the state versus what other states are using. I think it's all the same. It should. When I took it, it was all the same across the country.
Unfortunately, this is off topic,
Yes.
so is this something that we can have you bring up for future agenda items?
Or maybe just to ask you separately.
Absolutely, you can email me at any time, and I can also, just as for the next report, include pass rates as an attachment
Pass rates would be, I would,
for California.
or just
Part of
email it.
licensing.
If you get it, nobody else wants it, then just email it.
I absolutely can, definitely.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
One quick question.
Oh, Ms. Leon?
On page 3, if you don't mind just reminding the board, and me in particular, why is the number of first-time sitters down? And it seems like year over year, we're going to be significantly lower than 2014, 2015. What's going on?
Unfortunately, I can't speak to why applicants are not applying to take the exam out of college or once they're finished with school. I can mention that, May and June, we expect an increase. So I'd like to see at the end of the fiscal year next one to see if this June number pops back up due to graduation. I can speculate that repeat sitters, if you notice, are pretty standard. Once we get our last month in there, it'll boost it up because of the new exam. So we did experience a higher number of repeat sitters during those months right before. I don't know if that discouraged first-time sitters, however, but that's all I can really speak to in this position. I'm sorry.
Mr. Campos, did you? Oh.
Quick question. On that same page, there, first-time sitter, I noticed the total received and total approved. The total approved is 700 more than, is there a lag time?
That was carryover that we didn't manage to get approved from the previous year, so that number always is a little bit higher as we have carryover from fiscal years.
I had a question regarding, I guess, the first-time sitters. Do you track where they're coming from? Are they coming from out of state? Are they coming from in-state? Whether they completed schools, since we're doing outreach at universities. We talked about Fullerton more recently, or in this meeting. I'm just wondering do you track that when you're taking those applications?
Our current database does not track the school itself. Now, we do have a transcript database that links up to our students. However, if they had multiple transcripts from multiple schools, which is a lot of the case, I may not be able to give you exact numbers of where everyone graduated from.
I think we'll be looking for those where the degree was conferred.
I can follow up with what we track in our transcript database. If that's the only school that we put in, then I most likely would be able to give you something along those lines. I believe that NASBA also might track that in that pass rate booklet that we were talking about a little bit prior. Has it by schools, so that is something I can provide at a future date.
And I think the reason that I posed that question is if we want to strategically determine institutions within the state of California that we would be doing outreach, we could use that as a roadmap, if you will.
I like that.
Yeah, great.
Ms. Wright?
Do you get any feedback that the 150-hour requirement might be a explanation for the decline in first-time sitters?
We thought that when it first went into effect, we thought that would be, we would see some different numbers. But really, the only impact we saw during that time was an initial licensing. Everybody trying to get in beforehand was when we really saw that huge jump. I think it's fallen off our report nowadays, but we saw that huge increase for a while due to the 150. When it came to the exam, we didn't notice a huge impact. But like I said, it could be, and I can't speak to why they don't come to us as much.
Ms. Pierce?
And if I could just add on to that, the requirements for the exam didn't change, so they stayed the same at the baccalaureate degree in the 24-24, so you didn't have to have the 150 for the CPA exam.
Right, thank you.
Just a comment. The reason I brought it up is we know that the student population is increasing. We know there's a lot of efforts in different industries to attract students of color, just the overall changing student landscape. The fact that the numbers are going down just begs the question, is there something going on from the testing? Is there something going on from the fees? Because the student population is growing, so we should see this grow as well.
Test is getting harder.
Oh. Good to know. Don't want to make it easy. Mr. Campos?
One item of interest is any further insight into backlog issues that we may be experiencing in the licensing side, and particularly on two items pop out for me, and because I think our target average that we like to look at is about 30 days, if I remember right, for exam application processing and for licensure application processing. And both of those averages, I think, are slightly above that right now. And obviously, this is an average, which implies there's some range of cases or applications above that. And I don't know, I mean, this one doesn't lend itself to like the enforcement report, but there must be some aging or information you could provide that, and I'm hoping maybe it's not a huge range that we're talking about here, but that gives insight as to what are the outliers on the high end of this, right? And I think you gave some qualitative insights last time about incomplete applications, things that, all you can do is respond and get the individual to clarify. But it would be helpful to get some more information in that regard in here to just assess whether or not we've got any backlog issues that we need to, put further attention on.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Let me research that and we'll provide that in the next report. Any other questions? I have a quick question. So if you could remind me, so out-of-state firm registration, what does that mean? Does that mean a firm that was established in Utah wants to do business here in California and they register here?
Yes.
So, okay. But it's not like a Big Four firm. So you, for example, if you wanted to take your business to Hawaii.
I'd have to register in Hawaii.
Okay. I'm just curious what that is.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the public? All right, thank you. Appreciate it. Hey, because we are the Board of Accountancy and we're so efficient, we're going to take a couple items out of order to keep going. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that we addressed the two items that
Oh, okay.
skipped. So,
Do we address that now, or should we?
well, I don't know when you want to handle them, if you want to table them for a future meeting, or if you...
I figured we could table them in a future meeting, have Ms. Wright bring up the two items, future agenda items.
Lori Ajax and...
Mercy. On the
Skip
agenda.
the two ones that you skipped.
Correct, we're going to be coming back to them, because
Okay.
Ms. Ajax is going to be speaking tomorrow.
Oh, she is not today.
Yes, and then Senator Morlock will be here around 3 o'clock.
Okay.
So,
All right, great.
sorry about that. So, all right, so again, we are efficient, so we're going to kind of skip over the agenda a little bit, and we're going to go into item 9, the acceptance of the minutes. Okay. And do I take a motion for that? All right. Is there a motion to accept the minutes for May 18th, 19th, 2017, California Board of Accountancy meeting, the minutes for May 18th, 2017, the Legislative Committee meeting, minutes for May 18th, 2017, Mobility Stakeholder Group meeting, minutes for May 18th, 2017, Committee on Professional Conduct, and meetings for May 4th, 2017, Enforcement Advisory Committee meeting.
So moved.
I'm going, you know what, I'm going to take it to Ms. Robinson in a second by Mr. Savoy. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, what was the motion? So
The motion is
moved.
to accept the minutes on item 9.
Come on.
Do you want me to say this again, really?
No, I,
We need to clarify the motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there a
motion to approve the
is there-
minutes as written is
to-
kind of what I think I
All
heard.
right, well, fine.
Okay.
All right, we'll go with what you said. Is there a motion to accept the minutes?
We got that.
All right, thank God. All right. Is Is there any other comments or discussion by Mr. Campos? No? Okay. Any other comments from the board? And any comments from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes?
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park,
Yes.
Jen O. Yang,
Abstain.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
George Pamela,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
Alicia Burhow.
Yes. Okay, with that, the motion passes. Thank you very much for that. Okay, moving on to item 10, American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. We do not have a report for that. So we're going to move into item B, the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. We have a report, or maybe no report on meetings for the National Board, except we'll go into Kathleen, but there's no report from you, Ms. Salazar?
No.
Okay, and no report from Mr. Silverman. So we'll go ahead to item 2C, Continuing Professional Education Committee.
No, we did not meet.
Oh, you didn't have a report?
Well, no, they had an out-of-town meeting, but no,
Okay, but you don't have a report?
I do not.
Okay, all right, we're moving right along then. Okay, moving on to item 11, we're going to be doing resolutions for retired California Board of Accountancy, Enforcement Advisory Committee, Peer Review Oversight Committee members. I'm going to take item A last, so I can be super, super mean. So I'm going to get to this. All right, so I'm going to go ahead to resolution for retiring Enforcement Advisory Committee member Gary Kane. So I'm going to read these into the record, so please bear with me. This resolution from the California Board of Accountancy, whereas Gary Kane has faithfully served as member of the California Board of Accountancy Enforcement Oversight Committee from July 23, 2009 through July 31, 2017. Whereas throughout his term of service, at all times, Gary Kane gave fully of himself and his ideas and acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas he has discharged these important responsibilities in a manner of reflecting great credit upon himself and the accounting profession, and whereas his colleagues wish to express to him their high esteem and regard, now therefore be it resolved that the members of the California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Gary Kane for outstanding contribution he made during his term of service on the Enforcement Advisory Committee and the Consumers of California. I would like to entertain a motion to accept this resolution.
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay. Is there any discussion or comments? Any comments from the public? Go ahead and call for the vote.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
George Pamela,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes?
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park,
Yes.
Jen O. Yang,
Yes.
and Soshi Leon.
Yes. Okay, with that, it passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go on to a resolution for Michael Schwartz. Whereas Michael Schwartz has faithfully served as a member of the California Board of Accountancy Enforcement Advisory Committee from July 23, 2009 through July 31, 2017, and whereas throughout his term of service at all times, Michael Schwartz gave fully of himself and his ideas and acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas he has discharged those important responsibilities in a manner reflecting great credit upon himself and the accounting profession, and whereas his colleagues wish to express to him their high esteem and regard. Now therefore be it resolved that the members of the California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Michael Schwartz for the outstanding contribution he made during his term of service on the Enforcement Advisory Committee and the Consumers of California. I'd like to entertain a motion to accept this resolution. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any discussion? I would personally like to thank Michael. He was one of the first people on the board when I came on, who was very welcoming. So I really appreciate his service and his time that he has spent with the Board of Accountancy. So with all that, we'll go ahead and call for a vote.
George Pamela,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Jen O. Yang,
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes?
Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
All right.
Okay, it passes. Thank you so much. Okay, moving on to item D, the California Board of Accountancy resolution for Nancy Corrigan. Whereas Ms. Corrigan has faithfully served as a member of the California Board of Accountancy Peer Review Oversight Committee from July 28, 2010 through July 31st, 2017, and whereas she served as the inaugural chair of the Peer Review Oversight Committee and was instrumental in overall success establishment of the PROC. And whereas she is currently serving as a member of the California Board of Accountancy and Enforcement Advisory Committee and served as chair and member of the California Board of Accountancy Qualifications Committee. And whereas throughout her term of service, at all times, Nancy Corrigan gave fully of herself and her ideas and acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas she has discharged these important responsibilities in a manner reflecting great credit upon herself and the accounting profession. And whereas her colleagues wish to express to her high esteem and regard. Now therefore be it resolved that the members of the California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Nancy Corrigan for the outstanding contribution she made to her term of service on the Peer Review Oversight Committee and the Consumers of California. I'd like to entertain a motion to accept the resolution.
So moved.
Okay, I have a first. Is there a second? From Ms. Salazar. Any questions or comments? Okay, any comments from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for the vote.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar, Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Deidre Robinson,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Jen Oyang,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
and Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Okay, with that, motion passes. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to item E, a resolution for Sherry McCoy. The California Board of Accountancy resolution, whereas Sherry McCoy has faithfully served as a member of the California Board of Accountancy Peer Review Oversight Committee from July 28, 2010 through July 31st, 2017, and whereas she served as vice chair of the Peer Review Oversight Committee and was instrumental in the overall successful establishment of the committee, and whereas throughout her term of service at all times, Sherry McCoy gave fully of herself and ideas and acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas she has discharged these important responsibilities in a manner reflecting great credit upon herself and the accounting profession. And whereas her colleagues wish to express to her their high esteem and regard. Now therefore, be it resolved that the members of the California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Sherry McCoy for the outstanding contribution she made during her term of service on the Peer Review Oversight Committee and the Consumers of California. And entertain a motion to accept? All right. First from Ms. Hines, second from Ms. Salazar. Any questions or comments? Any comments from the public? Okay, with that, we'll call for a vote.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Jen Oyang,
Yes.
Sunny Youngsun Park,
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Alicia Burhow,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
George Familet,
Yes.
and Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Okay, with that, it passes unanimously. And thank you for your forbearance. I appreciate this. We'll go back to item A, the final one for California Board of Accountancy former member resolution to Larry Kaplan. So whereas Lawrence Kaplan was appointed by the Speaker of the Assembly and has faithfully served as a board member of the California Board of Accountancy from March 15, 2011 through May 25, 2017, and whereas he served as chair and member of the Legislative Committee and member of the Committee on Professional Conduct, Enforcement Program Oversight Committee, and Strategic Planning Committee, and a member of the Task Force to examine experience for CPA licensure. And whereas throughout his term of service, at all times, Larry Kaplan gave fully of himself and his ideas, acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas Larry Kaplan is an independent management consultant at Larry Kaplan Consulting, specializing in assisting nonprofits, elected officials, and public agencies. And whereas he has served as a Los Angeles area director of the Trust for Public Land, Southern California, regional director for Senator Barbara Boxer, CEO of the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce, and chief of staff for council member Mike Wu. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the members of the California Board of Accountancy express their heartfelt appreciation to Larry Kaplan for the outstanding contribution he made during his term of service on the California Board of Accountancy and to the consumers of California. May I entertain a motion to accept? Oh, my. All right, we'll go with Ms. Leon and a second by Ms. Wright. Any questions or comments?
I'll just mention, when I was first appointed to the board, Mr. Kaplan was assigned as my mentor, and he was very welcoming to me, and I really appreciated the comments that he provided often during our sessions, and I really admired him a lot for his commitment, for the commitment that he showed to this board. As a public member, as you know, like myself, he presented a model that I, hope to be able to follow. So I do commend him in his public service to the Board of Accountancy. I want to mention that.
He's going to be dearly missed. I mean, he was a great contributor to the board's work and great perspective. So he's going to be very missed on this board.
I agree.
Especially his thought-provoking questions.
Very much so.
He challenged the board, and that was very exciting. And he's one of the first people that I was, learning from when I first came in, because he had very open questions that really challenge our values, he will be missed.
We ought to record this and send it to him.
Oh, yeah.
It is being recorded.
It's being recorded. Yeah, so I appreciate that. Yeah, Larry and I came on around the same time, and we call each other, he was my partner in crime on this board, and he really did, and I'm not crying, I promise. It's just my throat. But, he's changed this board for the better, and you're right. He came up with the thought-provoking questions and, changed my mind on a lot of issues that, I came on board one way and I would always hear Manny or Sally saying one thing, and he would change my mind on something else. So we're going to miss him a lot. So thank you very much for that.
Well, and we will be having a dinner for Mr. Kaplan in conjunction with the September board meeting, and so I'm sure many of these comments he'll appreciate hearing directly at that dinner.
Did you say a roast?
No, that did not.
If you lead it, Mr. Campos, I'm sure this will follow.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Any comments from the public? With that, we'll call for the vote.
Kathleen Wright,
Yes.
Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Katrina Salazar.
Yes.
Deirdre Robinson.
Yes.
Sunny Young Sun Park.
Yes.
Jen Oyang.
Yes.
Soshi Leon.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
George Pamela.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
And Alicia Burhow.
Yes. All right, well, thank you very much for that. With that, the motion passes unanimously. Okay, I think we are, okay. Let's do that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take a recess. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to start the tour a little early at 11 rather than 11:15. And then we want to get back here so we can start committee work. So instead of 1:30, can we do, or do we have to do 1:30, or can we start at 1:15?
Your agenda says 1:30.
All right, I tried. So, okay, so at this point, we'll go ahead and go into recess while we give everyone a break and go take a tour of the new facilities. And from recess, we are convening the full board. This is the California Board of Accountancy on July 20th, 2017. Thank you for being here again. Do we need to do another roll call, or are we good to go? We don't need another roll call.
As long as you didn't adjourn the meeting.
We did not, we were just recessed. Okay, good to go. All right, so we are going to go ahead and start on agenda item 1B, discussion regarding continuing education for licensees serving full-time in the California State Legislature and the United States Congress. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide us with the opportunity to discuss possible changes to CBA regulations as it pertains to continuing education for licensees serving full-time in the California State Legislature and the United States Congress. At this time, I'm very happy to have the Honorable Senator Morlock representing the 37th District in Orange County. He is here at the table. We are very happy to have you here. You are here in our new office, so you are the first elected. So we're very happy that you are seeing this today and that you're here before us to bring up this issue.
I'm going to take
yes.
a selfie.
All right. Do I look okay? Welcome.
Thank you
The floor is
very much,
yours.
Madam President. I wanted to start off by saying my name is John, and I'm a compulsive, California Board of Accountancy attender.
Yes, you are.
So we are back. Congressman Sherman is good about calling me every once in a while to see how we're doing. And so we've got some materials we'd like to hand out. You've already got it?
Yeah.
Oh, very efficient.
We're very efficient here.
I'm very impressed. But you don't have Congressman Sherman's. We just got
Right here.
today.
Oh.
So if you can hand those out as well. So we've been looking at this from a legislative standpoint and also just from a procedural standpoint. And it seems for the State Board of Accountancy that maybe updating the license renewal handbook would be maybe the best way to pursue this opportunity. Congressman Sherman has been working with the AICPA, and he's also been working with the National Association of State Board of Accountancy to also look at this as an option. And that's pretty much it, just real simple as an idea of what qualifies for continuing professional education. Just as a reminder, state law says if you're a lawyer, attorney, and you serve in the legislature, you don't have to do any CPE at all. It all qualifies as CPE, which puts CPAs at a disadvantage having to get 80 hours of CPE every 2 years. So that's basically the message, and I'm happy to take any questions or to defer to the congressman.
Sure. I do want to go ahead and for the record, I'd like to welcome Congressman Brad Sherman of the 30th Congressional District on the line. Hello, Congressman. We're happy to have you here at the California Board of Accountancy. So
glad to be with you. I fully endorse everything Senator Morlock said. I'm co-chair of the CPA caucus in the House of Representatives. I'm thrilled that we have 7 CPAs in Congress, and we need more. And one of the many factors that will get people who are CPAs to come join what is otherwise a Congress very heavy on lawyers would be to deal with this issue. Actually, it's certainly no get-rich-quick scheme. Members of the House aren't even allowed to earn any money at all as a CPA. And my only client is my mother, and I don't send her a bill.
Hope not.
Nor am I certified to do so. The other thing is that it'd be good to have the CPA credential to get my colleagues to listen to me and to our caucus, and not to say, I used to be a CPA when I'm commenting about tax and budgetary matters here. I fully support what the senator's doing. In addition to that, I've been talking to the ICPA because I'd like to see something worked out nationally, and especially worked out for California. First, I commend California for having an understanding that a wide variety of different programs, from taxation to financial planning to accounting, are relevant to the profession. And in fact, there are thousands of programs for which someone can fill in a form that says this is continuing education. And there are even thousands that qualify as the technical rather than the non-technical side of that. And I used to lecture at these all the time, which shows that the standards are not too high. And when I compare what people got credit for listening to me versus what can be learned at a legislative hearing or meeting, I think that the legislative hearings and meetings deserve to be recognized. Now, if you look at this very short additional proposal, it would simply be that you look at the AICPA, which is, I think, the premier professional organization nationwide, or any other organization your staff determines to have equivalent competency, and they could determine which legislative hearings meet the requirements for continuing education. I've even gone farther in this and say, we won't give you any credit for preparing. I spent a lot of time preparing, but we won't give you any credit toward the ethics, and won't give you any credit toward the regulatory review. So I've tried to make it as narrow as possible. So I support Senator Morlock's idea. I support my idea, of course, and I hope that you can work this out so that the education that you get in legislative activities is not ignored while education in so many different other settings is approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I'd like to go ahead and, if you are amenable, I'd like to open up to you and Senator Morlock for some questions from our board.
I actually had a question.
Yes.
I appreciate Congressman Sherman adding my name is Carrie Ann Farrell Hines. I'm a member of the Accountancy Board for Congressman Sherman on the telephone. I appreciate the addition of the clarification of what continuing education requirements would not be removed or eliminated, because one of the concerns that I had even originally was if someone is serving in elected office, and before it was a bit more broad, but now it's been narrow, but if someone is serving in the legislature or the Congress and then they go back into the profession, if they've served for a long period of time, accountancy is such a technical profession that if you are not required to engage in continuing education, particularly on the technical aspects of practicing, then it would put you in kind of a tricky situation as a professional in going back into private practice and not having been required to keep up with those continuing education requirements. But however, by limiting the exemption to not preclude the ethics education requirement and the regulatory review requirement, that addressed one of the concerns that I had about a broad exemption for members of the state legislature or the Congress. I'm an attorney, and I definitely appreciate the time commitment and that is required to fulfill continuing education requirements and how onerous that can be when you're juggling it with public service. However, I also know that it's really important. I don't extend myself as a litigator because I don't spend time, reviewing the evidentiary, continuing education requirements around evidentiary rules or things like that. So I'm not fulfilling my professional responsibility because I can't hold myself out as a professional in that way. So I just would want to see some sort of reciprocal, exemption, requirement for CPAs, that technically you have to stay, current in order to make sure that if you go back out into the public as a CPA, you are then holding yourself out to the members of the public in such a way that is in their best interest and is protecting them. You're staying current on what the laws are currently.
Senator Morlock?
Thank you.
I'd like to attack that. There are a lot of courses that I'd like to take, but I don't have to because I'm inactive now. But if I were active, the Cal CPA is offering some great courses like how do you deal with Prop 64 next year with the sale of medical and non-medical marijuana. I look at that course. I look at that and I say, I'd be going to that course because it fits not only with CPE, but it also fits with my job. And that would be real interesting. But I agree, being out of practice, the information overload factor, I could see myself having to take a Sidney Kess and a Spidell course maybe a couple times just to start catching up. So I appreciate that. So I think if there's no incentive for me to get the full 80 hours and complement it with courses like this, then it's, I look at it and go, darn, I'd like to take that course, but why? Why? Because, I got to find the time, and I'm kind of getting it on the other side because I sit on governance and finance, and I fully attend all the hearings. In fact, I'm the only one, along with the chair, that has stayed for the entire meetings because of the importance of the subject. So, but I appreciate also the point that you made about the time. Being an elected legislator, it's like tax season all year long. It's just not doing legislation. It's doing fundraising. It's doing constituent events. It's doing travel back and forth. It's doing tours of companies that want you to come and visit. And I'm working 14, 16 hours a day. I still keep a day timer from when I was a young accountant. I still keep track of my units. I get teased about it all the time, but I can show you where all my time is being spent. So I guess the issue would be maybe some relief, because we're just dying, but because we're working hard. Two, you don't want to make public service a disincentive to those that are certified. If you have to add 80 hours every 2 years on top of everything else, that's going to be, I think, a disincentive. Not to complain, but this is the lowest paying job I've had in the last 30 years. I was partner, and then I was county treasurer, and then I was county supervisor, and now I'm state legislator. And my wife was warned by a volunteer a few years back that by the time I'm done, I'll be a park ranger at this salary, the way I'm going. But I don't make outside income, and I do get a per diem, but that pays for my housing up here. So Brad might have some other things to share, but I think we should strike the balance. Obviously, the law industry has, and they've allowed lawyers to be legislators and not have to get CPE while they're there.
Do we have awareness of any other states, CPAs from other states, where there is some credit for legislative experience on the CPE front?
Yeah, that was my question as well.
I'll let Brad answer that.
Did you hear the question, Congressman?
I'm not aware of the rules of other states. I will say that the AICPA is working with the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, and so as to the additional proposal that I've put forward, if you adopted it, I'm sure you would not be the only state. The ICPA is willing to look at legislative hearing files and indicate whether they're worthy of CPE credit. So I don't know precisely where we are now, but I do know where a good chunk of the profession will be.
Congressman, you mentioned
if California leads the way.
That's the goal, all the time. You mentioned that 7 of your colleagues are CPAs. Are any of them licensed, or are they all inactive as well because of their service?
There's a mixture, and I haven't talked to them all about this. One it just got elected, and so he's still current. One dropped out a while ago, and I haven't checked with the others.
Okay, interesting. Mr. Campos? That's right.
Thank you. I guess what might be helpful in making a decision on this is if we could get a background information regarding how many different activities we already have approved that will exempt you from the CE requirement. As an example, publishing, teaching, which are already approved. And then my perception would be that once we understand what we've already approved and consider that in relation to this proposal, that we prepare probably just a short list of requirements that we would impose on an additional activity that we would accept as CE, because it seems to me as though it's a little bit sporadic. I mean, we get a proposal and we then listen to very convincing arguments that this should be exempt. And I just would like to be able to put this in a framework that would say, here are the considerations that must be met before we exempt this activity, and then ensure that the activities that we have already exempted, which are not CE, i.e. teaching and publishing, those are the two that I know about, there may be others,
to ensure that those activities fit within the criteria that we establish as the benchmark for providing an exemption. My further concern is that if we start exempting a lot of different things, we're going to get a lot of different proposals requesting that they be exempted as well, that are not the traditional continuing education process.
Campos?
Yeah, my only point was that last part. It's very compelling discussion here about the need to have CPA representation in the legislature, but once you start with one aspect, then the floodgates kind of go of, well, I'm in private industry, I'm not doing public accounting, and there are myriads of places where we have CPAs that will probably try to find ways to have some credit. But I think Ms. Wright's point on, are there any other places where we give credit for any CPE already? And I don't think there are any. I know we have some attest experience that we try to do, but I'm not sure that there are any other places where there's credit for CPE. And so
Teaching and publishing there are.
it'd be good to have staff come back with maybe specifics to prove that out, because I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with that.
Ms. Hines?
That's the direction that I thought Ms. Wright was going in, which was looking at where we provide, where CPAs are able to fulfill these educational requirements, and potentially looking at providing some expanded definitions of what fulfills the continuing education requirement, that would then achieve the goal of allowing people who are public servants to, qualify to fulfill those requirements, and as opposed to opening the door to the exemption creep, which I know is something that I think that's the real hesitation that we have, is that we have a compelling argument that's made here, then what happens when you have a compelling argument that's made by someone else? But the tension is that, you do provide a compelling argument, and it is it is absolutely what you're doing is relevant to your practice. So how can we strike that balance of addressing the need and also preserving, our mission, which is focused on protecting the public? I also had a question about whether or not we could have staff give us a breakdown of, if we took out the ethics education requirement and the regulatory review course requirement, how much that would then alleviate some of the,
Regulatory is two hours every 6 years. And ethics is 4 hours every 2 years.
So the 6 out of the 80 hours are fulfilled by
What
those.
I'm saying is, it's 2 hours every 6 years. So that's every third renewal, which is not much at all.
Okay, all right.
And you can do it online.
But I'm asking
The
though,
rest
if we were trying to address the issue by looking at how we can fulfill these continuing education requirements with alternative activities rather than creating new exemptions, I feel like that strikes the balance for us of achieving the goals that are requested by our elected officials who have come to present to us today, while also, addressing some of the concerns that, we continue to have. How do we get to a yes here? How does everybody get to a yes here?
Folks, if I can chime in,
Please.
I want to put in a pitch for for the expeditious adoption of what I put forward, which is a very modest proposal, and just say that the classes that are available that can be used by every CPA in the state. It's just anybody who decides to have a seminar that has a relevant title. Somebody can fill in. Given back in my former life, a lot of presentations that qualified. Here, under the proposal I'm giving you, you have a much higher standard. First, you've got a legislative hearing. I mean, people got credit for back in the 80s for listening to Brad Sherman. I just spent 2 hours with Janet Yellen. I assure you that she told us more relevant to financial planning than I ever did. When you have the quality of information that's available, plus you get the premier professional organization to review it and certify that it's applicable, that I think meets an even higher standard than many of the seminars that are qualified today. So there's my pitch.
And
So real
maybe,
quick, let me, because I'm going to be a devil's advocate, but I am going to come to you. I'm sorry, did you have?
well, I would just say that as you do the study, as you have staff do the study, I would also work with the state bar and see how the lawyers have eliminated their exemption creep, because they've got it. And I don't know if they've got other exemptions than what you've got on page 14 for the CE credit for teaching and the CE credit for published work. And so I would just encourage you to make sure that you're looking at some parity as opposed to, you know, worrying about something new. Obviously, they've addressed it. And I wish I had their CPE.
I'll go to Mr. Campos, and I'll go back to you.
Yeah, and so one question for you, and you address it in the information you provide, but clearly there's an inactive status for this very reason, not to do CPE, and it's a licensed CPA, so it's not that it's not licensed, it's a licensed CPA who happens to be inactive, which solely means the CPE requirement has not been fulfilled. And I gather from your materials that somehow undermines the credibility of the role of the CPA in those venues, because that's really
it certainly undercuts my credibility here in Congress. Yep.
Okay.
It is not real pleasant, and I've never done it, because I'm also a certified financial planner, and I went inactive there, and I had to go through a serious course of study there as well in the test. But putting CFP in parentheses RET period or inactive, it takes you more time to explain it than bothering to put it on your material.
I imagine that if it said something like CPA parentheses legislator, it still would have that same effect. And I'm just throwing that out there because I don't know what's easier to do, create a different status or have a credit for CPE, but I assume something like that would also be problematic.
I think, you know, now that I'm 61 and you look back at life, it would have been better to get an MBA or a PhD or something else that I can keep for the rest of my life and never lift a finger again. And I can still say I'm a PhD or I'm a MBA, or you get the acronym. We're here with a CPA. If I can't make it all fit, then I've got to let it go. And I have to sit here and say to you, it doesn't matter to me because it hasn't impacted my career at all. But how does it impact our industry? Because now you're losing the benefit of saying, well, we have a CPA, a caucus of one, out of 120 in Sacramento, and you've got 7 CPAs in Congress, and so you're missing out on the ability to market that. You can keep your MD, I'm sure. How do you not be doctor for the rest of your life, even when you're not practicing? So it's probably an intangible goodwill kind of thing, but I think that's where we're missing out. You're missing sort of like a marketing opportunity.
Ms. Shields, I know you have an opinion on this.
Right, so with respect to, even if the board had the will to address these proposals today, the law requires anything regulatory to be done through regulation. At a minimum, the suggestions to the handbook is just a recitation of what's in regulation. So if anything needed to be changed in the handbook, you would need to change it first in regulation. And it's quite a laborious process, a minimum of 2 years to get through. And one of the issues that we have to address when proposing a regulation is how it furthers a state policy. And the policy that we further is protection of the public. So that would be the first question we'd have to answer is, how is this necessary to protect the public? That would be the first question that has to be addressed. Secondly, the law has changed quite a bit since the 80s, and the area that's developed since 2015 is the Sherman antitrust liability for board members who are stakeholders. Market participants is what the court calls them. And so for boards composed of licensed members, the liability is that if you take an action that displaces or perceived as displacing competition in the marketplace, you could potentially have liability exposure. And so a proposal that would allow credit for CE to only select members of a licensing population could be perceived as anti-competitive because it would be burdensome to the rest of the general licensing population. So I would advise the board to be careful in looking at any regulatory proposals that could have that perceived impact. I think some of what Ms. Wright was mentioning about looking at categories that all the licensing population could avail themselves of might be something you could look into, but I wouldn't recommend giving potential categories of people just exemptions or credits towards continuing education because of that argument. The other option would be legislative proposal. A legislative proposal would not subject the board to any kind of antitrust liability. The lawyers that work in the public sector have that exemption because it's in statute. It's not a rule of the state bar that you have exemption from CE. It's a statutory enactment, and that would be, I think, if the board was even interested, because again, your mission is public protection, so you'd have to look at what public benefit would be conferred by this particular path. But I think that would be the safer from a liability perspective approach.
Okay. Ms. Wright?
If I can put on my lawyer's hat, I'm also a lawyer.
Oh, well, there you go. Of course you are.
Yeah. Those cases on antitrust deal with circumstances in which members of the State Board of Accountancy somehow personally benefit from their votes, and I don't think that any of you are legislators. There's no way that your vote in favor of either John's proposal or mine is going to somehow be a way to build your CPA practice to the denigration of anyone else or to exclude anyone else from competition. Second, as to regulations, at least my proposal, I'm not asking you to amend the handbook. I'm not asking you to amend the regulations. I could fill out a form right now saying, here's this seminar I went to, and I was there for 2 hours, and here's this hearing, which I could have called a legislative seminar. Janet Yellen spoke to us for 2 hours, and your staff would have to decide, well, that's a little different. That's a hearing. Janet Yellen was speaking about where the economy is going, but it's a little different than the other forms we get. Does that count? And I'm just asking you to say, yes, it does. I think your staff might reach the same conclusion anyway. I assure you that what Janet had to say was much more important to understand financial planning than at least the bottom half of the seminars offered in the state. So I'm not asking for a change of regulation. I'm not asking for a change in the handbook. I'm just asking you to advise the staff, is Janet Yellen's remarks disqualified from CPE credit because she was in the Rayburn House office building when she was speaking? And I reached the conclusion, no, that's legitimate. That's as educational as if she was at a conference. Again, maybe what I should have done is just filled out the form and sent it in and see what would happen. Instead, I'm asking you to guide the staff that presentations made in John's building or mine ought to be evaluated on the merits and not disqualified just because they are hearings. You look at the educational seminar. I mean, hearing is just another word for seminars for legislators. And in fact, the public can attend as well. But there are many. Most of these seminars, not anybody can attend. You either have to pay a fee or some of the bigger firms put on the seminars just for their employees. All I'm asking for is a decision that you evaluate the Janet Yellen's presentation on its merits and don't disqualify it. And I'm not sure there's a reason to disqualify it, but don't disqualify it just because it was in the Rayburn House office building.
Ms. Wright? And thank you for that. And that, Congressman, is along the lines of what I was thinking as this discussion was taking place, but if it's slightly different, so let me express my thought. Where we make exemption, which is on this page 14, we don't put, the onus is not on CBA. When I take credit, because I do, for publishing and teaching, I have to prove how many hours I spent publishing, and I have to show that the article was actually published, and how many hours I spend teaching, and that the course that I've taught is new material. It's not material that I've taught previously. So what the congressman is suggesting, I would add a couple of bells and whistles. The onus should be on the person that is requesting the CE exemption, not on CBA to formulate a new category of exempt.
I'm not asking for an exemption. I'm just asking for a determination
very
that
good.
The seminars that I'm attending are as good as the ones I was teaching 20 years ago.
Very
and
good.
I'll tell you, having been at both, the ones I'm attending are better than the ones I was teaching, and there are CPAs all over the state who claimed successfully credit for the ones I was teaching. So I'm not asking for an exemption. I'm not asking for a special rule. I'm asking to avoid a discrimination, which would be that because it takes place in the Capitol, it's disqualified. That instead, a presentation on issues that come within the categories of CPE are allowed, that just because it's in a capital doesn't mean it's not qualified.
And thank you for that.
And frankly, you may not need to adopt any policy at the board level at all. If just the people who review these forms would just do so in a way that's fair.
Okay, and thank you for the correction, and you are correct. It would be an alternative CE, an alternative activity that would meet the CE requirement. But the point would be
it's not an alternative activity. It's sitting in a seminar. That is the main activity. Most hours that are claimed for CPE are for sitting in a seminar.
Okay, but there are requirements on CE providers in the CBA rules, and so the onus on the applicant requesting this activity to be qualified continuing education, and I don't oppose it, and your comments about Ms. Yellen and so forth are totally relevant. But my only comment would be that then it would be on the applicant to show that the CBA requirements for continuing education with respect to this alternative activity have been met.
Correct.
Okay.
I don't regard it as an alternative activity. There are, at least in my house, and I believe in John's, the permanent records of who was in attendance, which of course is a requirement imposed on those who sponsor seminars. I'm not aware that the sponsor has to file a form. It's up to the licensee to file a form, indicate what seminars or other educational activities, but seminars is the big one, they attended. And I guess the sponsor has to maintain those permanent attendance records, and that's being done since the Constitution was adopted. And John and I have better records than any other provider in the state.
Ms. Shields.
So, the requirements for providers and the requirements for live presentations are all delineated in regs. So if you can meet those regulatory requirements, then you can have a shot at it. But I think asking the board to reinterpret or interpret their regs in a certain manner, I think is regulatory and would need a regulatory change. So if the provider requirements for live presentation are met, then the staff can process it accordingly.
Okay,
Or if the
well,
requirements for program measurements are met, then they can process it accordingly. But anything that would require reinterpretation of the reg as something being a seminar versus a live presentation, that would require a regulatory change, because interpretation of law is regulatory. When it's a general application of a law or interpretation of a regulation, it requires a change to
Under the
regulation.
Administrative Procedure Act and the similar laws in the state, guidance on how to apply a regulation to a particular circumstance is not an amendment to a regulation, but it's in substance, the hearings we're talking about here are every bit as good, every bit as relevant, every bit as thorough as what you are giving credit for. But there may be, some little detail that's different, that's of no substantive importance. I don't know whether there is even a detail that is a problem.
Yeah, Ms. Hines, and then we're gonna, I know we have to get everyone wrapped up.
Okay.
But Ms. Hines?
But if I fill out the form and send it in just claiming 2 hours for Janet Yellen, maybe you can take a look at that. I don't want to fill out the rest of the form, because if you don't like Janet, you're not going to like any of my other presenters.
Probably not.
And so,
but that is something we could look at.
Instead of this coming from, look, I strongly support everything John said. I like my own proposal. I hope that the board would adopt it. Another way to go is to fill out the form, and hopefully it will be evaluated on its substantive merits, and not saying, well, yeah, but in this one unimportant detail, it's different from the usual seminar. So that's anyway. I should let John close, or answer any questions that anybody else has.
Right. I'm going to go to Ms. Hines for a question. I have a question, but yes, we'll have Senator Morlock close. Ms. Hines?
So I wonder if I had two things. I wonder if what we could do is ask staff to, based upon the discussion that we're having, evaluate specifically the live presentation courses aspect of the licensing renewal guidelines, regulations, as well as maybe the credit for published work, and potentially look into what would be required to add an additional area that may include hearings or other activities that would fall under the engagements of elected officials serving in the state legislature and in the Congress, and determine whether or not first we could interpret into those already existing regulations an expanded interpretation that then would allow, Senator Morlock and Congressman Sherman to provide their forms and to make a case for having those activities applied in the short term, because the changes to regulation do take a long time, and that would probably be the fastest way to address their concerns right now, is to encourage them to submit these activities, chairing hearings and publishing, reports in the course and duty of their public service, and supplying those to the CBA, and then having the CBA make a determination as to whether they fulfill the continuing education requirements. And then the second thing would be, if staff determines that there cannot be any interpretation into the existing regulations, then come back and make recommendations as to what kind of regulations would need to be promulgated in order for us to address the concerns that have been raised, very, very compellingly by both Senator Morlock and Congressman Sherman. Then the second question I had was, Congressman Sherman has presented an interesting alternative. Senator Morlock, you have proposed an outright exemption. Are you in agreement with Congressman Sherman's alternative proposal, or are you still more interested in seeking an outright exemption from the continuing education requirements?
Well, to be honest with you, Congressman Sherman's a Democrat, and I'm never going to agree.
Really?
Well, this is a nonpartisan,
Okay, never mind.
apolitical environment that we're operating in. So,
I think this robust discussion has been very helpful, because we've moved from exemption creep to credit creep. So I appreciate that, because I too give speeches, and I have the joy of explaining to the public what a CAFR is, and what does unrestricted net deficit mean, and how is it looking for California compared to 49 other states. I even do that on the floor of the Senate, try to do math lessons on how California is doing. So I appreciate, I think we both have solutions. We started this as a process, and we were here 2 years ago, last year, on what's the best way. We looked at legislation, but we thought, let's work with your CPE handbook. Let's see if we can change things. Now, if it requires regulation, which is of course, you've recommended, or at least proposed as one of the solutions, I'm fine with that. If it takes time, if that's what it takes to change your handbook. But we kind of looked at legislation as the last way to do it, but we could. I mean, we have something drafted, and so we're ready to go. We had legislative council look at it, but I didn't want to go there first. I wanted to go there last.
Yes, well, we appreciate you coming to us to discuss this. So
it's a process, and Brad and I are concerned. I think we're trying to help you and help others, because I don't want to be a delegation or a caucus of one.
Yeah.
I could really use some reinforcements.
Well,
under the dome.
And I really agree with Ms. Hines about going back to staff and seeing if there's some solutions going forward. So,
If it's okay, I'd like to submit, instead of submit an entire application, just submit a couple of courses, seminars, if you will. Some would call them legislative hearings. I'm going to call them seminars. And see whether they go through the process, and then if they do, then I'll fill out the rest of the form.
Absolutely, we'd love to have that.
Good,
Yes.
good, that's what we'll do. And thank you.
All right.
May I ask one real quick?
Very quick. It has to be a question.
It is. Is there any evidence that a CPA has considered running for office and decided not to do so because of their license status?
I know of. I don't think so.
Google it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are a lot of reasons not to run for public office.
Good point.
I would say, people factor everything in. This is not going to be one of the top 5 elements. But, you've got a system in California where lawyers are exempt and accountants are not. And John is the only CPA willing to serve in the state legislature. And, God, I don't know how many lawyers you got up there, John, but it'd be one of the bigger law firms in the Central Valley.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you, Congressman Sherman. Senator Morlock, would you like to have the last word?
Oh, I think I did. I just thank you for your time, and I hope we can cooperatively work together to find a solution so it's beneficial to everybody, and that's the goal.
Well, we appreciate you being here, Congressman. We appreciate you being on the phone. Have a safe trip back here to California.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right. Well, thank you so much, Senator. We want to make sure you get to your flight, and we will go ahead and take this back to staff and see if we can't work with your staff to see if we can't work on something out. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you to your colleagues, committee. Thank you.
So at this point, we are going to go back into recess so we can finish our final committee meeting.
Didn't we have another report?
Oh, no, that's tomorrow.
That's tomorrow. Yes, so that's going to be tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Yeah, so we're going to go back into recess at this point so we can finish our final committee meeting. So it is 4:12, and we're going to start with CPC. You ready? Yes. You ready? All right, we are back in open session for the California Board of Accountancy, July 20th, 2017. We are now going to be going into closed session to review stipulations and, give me that. Thank you. So, pursuant to Government Code Section 11126C3, the California Board of Accountancy will convene into closed session to deliberate on disciplinary matters, stipulated settlements, default decisions, and proposed decisions. And pursuant to Government Code Section 11126E, the California Board of Accountancy will meet in closed session to receive advice from legal counsel on litigation, David Greenberg versus California Board of Accountancy, Los Angeles Superior Court, case number BS 15505. We are adjourned.